Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I want to thank you again for joining me in this channel. I am Professor Oriaso Odongo, and my channel is Professor Oriaso Odongo's Knowledge Hub. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to talk to you today about indigenous and local knowledge in climate change adaptation, what we call IK, or what we call lay knowledge. So the main question I'm asking is, what is the role of IK, or lay knowledge, in climate change adaptation? And this makes me to want to indulge you today with this presentation. And I want to start by saying that lay knowledge, or indigenous knowledge, is one of the most important knowledge sources, particularly with regard to climate change adaptation. And it is not only in climate change, in many other things that we are doing. Imagine that people have their cultures, their ways of lives. They have what they like, they have what they hate. They have society, community that they subscribe to. So then that really impacts on how they do their things, what they do, and who they consult when they are doing them. So IK, or indigenous knowledge, has frequently grown, particularly with regard to climate change. So what is it? We normally say that indigenous knowledge is a collective knowledge. Collective. It comprises the skills and practices. And these skills practices are normally developed by indigenous communities or local communities. And the process by which this happens is a natural one, a long-term interaction with their natural settings, their natural situations. So then this kind of knowledge is supposed to be observational. It constitutes the beliefs, the innovations, and even the practices of the community. It is the community themselves that will constitute this. They do it by immersing themselves in, or having a connection with the natural surrounding where they live. So this kind of knowledge, to a large extent, is very experiential. It's very practical, very locally applicable, and it is intergenerational in the fact that normally, whenever they have constituted this knowledge, whenever they have thought about it and come up with what works for them as a community, they then pass it down to generations. So that the process of constituting this knowledge, or having this knowledge, is quite long term. But then in many occasions we will agree that it is normally the foundation of everything. So if you see a community adopting a new technology or something new, then it could have actually been factored in. The IK of that community could have been factored in to permit that. So if you look at the locally appropriate development we are talking about, or those kind of actions that are very sustainable in communities, then you can imagine that they are related, or they are connected with the community's indigenous knowledge. That's what we are talking about. So then in many cases, people will ask, so what is the nature of this IK, or indigenous knowledge, as it were? So what we are saying is that it's normally unique for every community, but it is long-term, particularly in terms of perspectives and even practices. And in many cases in climate change, we could easily exemplify it with looking at the traditional land management practices that we see around. Look at even water conservation methods that people are deploying. Look at even the weather predictions. We have situations where people are largely using indigenous knowledge to predict weather. Look at even the way people farm, the resilient farming methods we are talking about. Look at even agroforestry, agro practices that we are talking about. So many times we will agree that depending on each community, we could have systems for weather predictions, as it were. We can also have systems for understanding climate risks, for example. We could also have systems that we are using to cope with impacts of climate change. We could also have systems that we normally use to inform the responses that we take as communities, including even early warning systems that we are using, including even how to adopt. Look at even the various adaptation options that communities will envisage, will to a large extent be borrowed from what they have constituted over the years. So in many cases, we talk about indigenous knowledge as very much ecological. They actually constituted to address the immediate issues that arise in the environment, in their immediate surrounding, immediate ecology. Some of them are agricultural. They are used to deal with agricultural practices. So how people farm, crop farming, livestock farming that we are talking about. Some of them are medicinal, for example. So we have IK being very impactful in community medicinal practices that we are talking about. Some of them even end up using it to build community resilient health systems, those that are founded and grown by community, about how they address the various issues that we have talked about previously. Some of them are cosmological, so they envisage or they embody the philosophies, the cultures, religion, even spirituality of these communities that we're talking about. But many many times what happens is that for you to have an effective system that works with communities, there is supposed to be an integration. Talk about integrations. So we have conventional way of doing things, the more modern scientific way of doing things, but can they work alone? To a large extent, you will find that scientific innovations or conventions that are supposed to work in community are those that have been integrated with the local knowledge, the lay knowledge, or the indigenous knowledge that we're talking about. So if we were to integrate them, then we enhance climate resilience, we enhance policy information that we're talking about, and we even empower communities. The good thing with the IK is that it is community comes up with it, and community is able to use them. So if you want them to act in a particular way, particularly with regards to climate actions that you're having, then you mainstream such kind of actions with community ideals, community way of life. So we have various IK ranges that we have. So we have like the ones that we are deploying in soil and water conservations. We've had them. So we are also having those that we are using in, for example, water harvesting. So we've been able to talk about a great deal of them. We're also having those that we are calling climate smart housing, for example. I'll give an explanation of what each one of them means. We also have climate smart agriculture. And then we also have the agroforestry practices that we have seen over the years. Now, how important are the IKs, or is the IK particularly with regards to climate change, for example? So IK, the way I have said, is normally produced and stored and passed to generations by communities. And the process of coming up with the indigenous knowledge that will work for community is normally long-term. So many times when you come up with them, they become long-term and they do influence what we call long-term planning. Now, if one IK, for example, is argued that is able to consider even impact of climate change over generations, and even into the future. So because they are normally constituted or developed through very deep and more sustainable approaches that community will envisage. So that's why they are kind of important. The other way by which the IK is important, particularly for climate change, is the fact that some of them have proven resilient. So we've been able to experience how to use zai pits, for example. So look at zai pits that are frequently used in arid and semi-arid areas. They are used for water harvesting. They are also used for managing dry lands. And they have really been able to be very impactful. If you go to many ASAL areas, you find water conservation practices or dry land management practices that are taking the design of zai pits, for example. And some of them are also with regard to diversity conservation, for example. So indigenous communities we are talking about that are coming up with them, they have extensive knowledge. They have extensive local knowledge about what happens in their own areas. And whenever they tell you that this is the way to go about it, they mean business, because they have the expertise, the local expertise that they normally use to. So they better understand that. So they come up with more resilient adaptation. So some of them are going to inform sound agricultural practices, while some of them are going to be very impactful, particularly in housing designs that are going to be very valuable in adaptation, particularly in arid and semi-arid areas. The other way by which they are going to be very central is that bit of community empowerment. Now, if you acknowledge and integrate lay knowledge or perspective of the community will take it that you really recognize them, and it will make them more active, and they will take leading roles, particularly with regard to what you want to do, developing and implementing climate adaptation options that you are looking for. The other one that we really attribute to it is sustainability. So many of these the actions that we are talking about, particularly adaptation actions, they're supposed to be sustainable. They're supposed to live longer than longer than the period or the causes for which they were initiated. And so if you mainstream them with the community perspectives, community initiatives, then they become much more sustainable and lovable. Look at cultural diversity. They acknowledge that we have different cultures, and each culture comes with its own experiences and ways of lives and ways of doing their things. Look at relatability. They are very relatable. Sometimes communities would really adopt something that relates with their way of life. So if you were to weave into their culture, then that will be very important. They normally help them to make informed decisions about the issues that affect them. And the problem solving is so important, and they, to a large extent, complement the conventional approaches, conventional ways that we use to mitigate or adapt to climate change. Now, let's quickly look at ILK in action. So how do we envisage indigenous knowledge, particularly in action? So have we been able to see them practically in action? Look at, for example, agroforestry. Where did it come from? Look at that. The PELIS program, for example, that we are having today. This practice where people are allowed to even do crop farming in forests. So you are able to really cultivate forests. We have trees there, and we also have crops. Where did it come from? It is possibly an integration of the cultural practices of communities, the Bushmen, the people who used to do farming in forests or in the wilderness, so that they are able to do this. Look at intercropping that we are talking about. So intercropping, where you have a plot and you have so many different variety of crops growing there, and this is going to really boost food security that we are having, particularly because it is a diversification of crops, that is why. So look at traditional water harvesting. So how do we harvest water today? Do we use irrigation? So what sort of irrigation do you think is going to be very compatible with community way of lives? I've been able to mention ZIPITs, for example, ZIPIT system. So we capture rainwater and then we store it, and then we even use different means to improve soil fertility, particularly in arid lands. Look at crop yields, particularly. How come do we still have communities that are living in arid areas and they are also doing crop development, for example? Look at climate smart housing. So you might look at them as traditional housing, as it were, but if you go there, they are very climate sensitive housing. You go to these places and you wonder, why are they not building using concrete, for example? So they have mud walled, then grass thatched residences, something like that. So these are able to withstand even harsh climatic conditions that we are talking about. So you look at them. So, but then IK as a source of knowledge, particularly with regard to managing and handling climate change, has experienced oppositions. It comes with challenges, also comes with opportunities that we're talking about. One of the challenges that it has and continues to have, which if addressed can really lead to proper use, will be skepticism that we are having. Many scientists and even many policymakers, even politicians, are still very skeptical about the IK, for example. They accuse them of spiritualism. They accuse them of very native and very backward, for example, making them not to be able to embrace them, even if they were good. The other issue that is affecting them is documentation. We haven't had situations where the IKs are documented so that they are able to outlive their communities. So if we were to document them, so that they form a body of knowledge that has been documented and recorded, so that everyone else knows them in equal measure, then we can have them being just good to go. The other challenge that we have with the IK, particularly when we are to use them with the modern ones, we're talking about it, is the integration challenge. So how is it possible that we are going to integrate lay knowledge with the modern, with the conventional knowledge? It poses a problem, particularly if the two, we know the two knowledge sources are one traditional, the other one modern, for example. We look at the culture and even geographical differences that we are having. Look at that. One of them is long-term, particularly indigenous one is long-term, yet the conventional can be short-term. So how do you integrate long-term activity with short-term? How do you integrate something that has arisen from a person from a different culture with one that has originated from another culture, for example. Look at all those. So it has all those things. Look at policy integration. There is need for us to mainstream indigenous and local knowledge, particularly in national policies and plans. But to what extent is this going on? Your guess could be as good as mine. But if they were supposed to be well documented, well systematized, and so we make sure that we isolate IKs, particularly that are common to a larger place, the region, then could just do just good. So look at some of the examples of IK that we use, particularly with regards to climate adaptation. A lot of them, traditional medicine. Look at traditional medicine, for example, local plants, how local plants are being used, how herbs are being used for healing, how they're being used. So communities will use them to build an effective community health systems. So to what extent are community health systems believed, particularly if they were built through IK, for example? Look at sustainable agricultural practices, organic farming. You know about organic farming and the value that it has now. For example, if you use cow dung as fertilizer, so you look at the cow dung as fertilizer now, and then look at even cow urine, for example, and how cow urine can then become natural sprays that we can use instead of pesticides. And they normally work in the cultures that we all know. Look at land and natural resource management circles. So look at even burning, controlled burning. Controlled burning is an indigenous approach to cultivation. And the founders believe that it ensures ecosystems' health. And we all know that that is important, for example. So we even have a sustainable hunting. When you go hunting in the forest, do you go hunting by finishing all of them? So communities have got ways by which they try to retain even species so that there is no overhunting. Look at even fishing. If you go to the lake, oceans, or even seas and you do fishing, to what extent are those methods that you use controllable or sustainable if they were not informed by the IKs of communities residing along those coastlines or those blue situations that we're talking about? Look at the traditional arts and crafts. So look at those. So deep connection with the environment and natural resources. So those who embrace IK are actually people who might think long term in terms of how to sustainably use resources that are available in their environment. I wanted to give you some of the common IKs that people normally use, particularly with climate change, some of the very common ones. But what I wanted to say before I give you some of the examples is that indigenous knowledge, particularly in climate change, could be based on a number of things that I want to mention. Some of them are based on animal behavior, so the way animal behaves, and even the animal systems. If you come to Kenya, for example, in the communities in Turkana, so they are able to even use the intestines of animals to be able to tell you about the climate situation of the place. Look at the animal behavior I'm telling you about. When cows are jumping up and down with tails up, so what does that show? Some of them are about cloud types, the cloud that we are talking about. Even the cloud cover and even the color of the clouds, they tell a lot, and that this depends on communities. Look at the specific vegetation phenomenon. If you see certain vegetation just sprouting, just growing in the nearby, so what does it tell? So communities have a way in which they explain what will happen thereafter. Look at even wind. Look at fogs. Look at even ice. Look at even storms, even thunderstorms, and even rainbows. What do they depict? Look at them. So wind. When wind blows from east to west, what does it show in your community, for example? Look at frogs. When frogs are no longer croaking, or when they are croaking, what does that show? Look at storms. The existence of fog, the existence of ice, for example. Morning dew, for example. So when you see them, what does that portend? Thunder, what does it show? And then the rainbow. In my community, what does rainbow? We used to believe that when you see rainbow, it's a sign that it will now not rain. So look at that. So you look at the sun and the moon and even their behaviors and even their nature. What does it show? Look at the human feelings and mannerisms. It's normally said that even how you feel in your body will tell you what weather is likely to come shortly. That if you are feeling hot, for example, or if when you are sleeping and you sweat a lot, there is something that will come the next day. So you look at that. So human feeling, mannerisms, and even moods. People even associate them with mood. So if I am moody or somebody is moody, so what does that show? In which community does it explain what now? Look at flowers, plant flowering, and even scents. So when you see flowers or plants flowering midday, what does that show? Look at even the scent, the smell that the flowers release when they are doing this. Look at the sea level rises. So sometimes you will be able to go next to the oceans and you see what's happening. So you would see the rising tides, you see the lowering of the tides. Look at even soil moisture. It hasn't rained, but you imagine you wake up in the morning and you find that it is the moisture, or even the smell of the soil. So ladies and gentlemen, I wanted also to end this by giving you the exact examples. Like if you see a swarm of locusts now, what does it shows? It says in many communities it's a sign, an early warning sign for drought. That's what people say. But when you see moon, which is rising and the crescent side is facing up, what does it show? It could show that we are heading for a dry month. It shows that. But then when you see absence of swallows, swallows, these birds, you see the birds, they are not around. So you imagine there will be no rains. If you see northward winds, if you live in a place and wind used to come from this direction, going towards that direction, you can quickly associate what will happen. Frogs croaking, or when the frogs are now present near streams or around ponds, what does it show? It might show that rains are almost coming with us. If you now see, if you now sight, for example, you see that the swallows are now coming. These birds are now coming. It means the rains are coming. When you see playful cows that are playful, heifers and bullocks, when they are very playful now, it might be a sign that the rains are very, very close. You see westerly winds, or you wake up and you find fog all over. So what does it show? It shows something. When the moon now rises with the crescent side facing sideways, it could be that you'll be having a rather larger rains. And there are so many examples. If you go through the various cultures, and we could do research across cultures, major cultures across the globe, and we are able to systematize. So it's possible that we can systematize this kind of study so that we are able to document. We are actually also tired of keeping on saying that IK or indigenous knowledge is unsystematic, is not documented, but we know very well that many cultures will share things that we can easily document, which can tell us quite a lot. The good thing is there is need for integration of lay or indigenous local knowledge with conventional one, particularly when you are approaching and dealing or managing issues about climate change. Ladies and gentlemen, allow me to just recap this presentation. Today, I was in the business of telling you about the value or the place of indigenous and local knowledge, particularly in climate change adaptation. I have talked about indigenous knowledge, calling it lay knowledge, or calling it traditional knowledge, or calling it lay knowledge. So that means one and the same thing, but they are done by communities. They are constituted by communities. It embodies community aspirations, community skills and practices that have been constituted over a long time of thinking and consultation, but which is going to be sent or passed to generations, which can embody. They become what we are calling cognition one, what you know before you know other knowledges. But they are normally very systematic if you look at them using the viewpoint of communities. They are the localized practices that they know. What they know, they can be used for prediction, they can be used for a number of things, but they can be integrated with the existing knowledge so that they can make sense. So we also say that they exist in a wide range. There are some for soil water management, some for water harvesting, housing designs that we're talking about, agriculture ones, the ones that are for agroforestry and all that. And I talked about even their significance, like they are long term, they are very resilient, they are the adaptations which are much known by people. They also empower communities. Then I've talked about them in action now, like agroforestry, intercropping that you see happening, traditional water harvesting that have also informed even the modern water harvesting we're having today, and even climate smart housing. So this kind of thing we are using today and calling it climate smart was originally an IK from most communities that we know. The challenges, we also mentioned them, talked about skepticism, lack of documentation, problem with integration. We talked about that. Then we talked about the policy integration, and I gave you a wide range of examples, and I even ended with which exact ones are there. And I punched it by saying we need to systematize them, we need to document them, and we need to integrate them. We need to accept them as forms of knowledge for us to use to do things that matter to us. Ladies and gentlemen, allow me to end it there, but I want to keep on reminding you to follow me, to like, to share, and to subscribe, because I have many more interesting discussions ahead that we can all share. Remember, knowledge leads to transformation, but it is only available on Professor Oriaso Odongo's Knowledge Hub. Thank you and welcome again next time.